Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect this. We're already here.
Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there's Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everyone. The Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we're going to interview Dr. Leo Sprinkle. And Dr. Sprinkle is a legendary pioneer of UFO contacted research and reincarnation. He began his career in psychology with the idea of being a conventional practicing scientist in the traditional sense. However, two close encounters with UFOs shifted his direction in life. And we're going to go into that and his long work that he's done with experiencers. And Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Leo?
Well, I'm really excited about having you on the show, Leo. I'm a certified past life therapist. I work with Roger Wilger, and I found, just as you found, lots and lots of people that in past lives have had contact with ETs, and so it's fascinating that you converged, actually went way ahead of me before I did, on the same kind of information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Hi.
Pleasure to be here.
We're so good. We're so delighted because I know you don't do a lot of interviews, and so I feel very like we've been chosen, selected. So thank you so much for coming on. Before we get started, we have a bunch of questions and talking points for you. And we've been listening to your YouTubes and studying your books and some written material you sent us. But before we get started with all of that, what else would you like to tell our listeners about yourself?
Well, I've been on this trail for a long time and meeting many interesting people. As you mentioned at the top of the show, I knew I'd be working with UFO researchers and ET experiencers. In fact, I knew when I was a master's student, and I knew it was also good to become a a doctor of philosophy, because that way I'd just be seen as eccentric instead of crazy. So I started undergraduate work at University of Colorado. After a little bit of time in the Army, I went back to Colorado for a master's, and then to the University of Missouri for a doctoral degree. Graduated in '61. Went to the University of North Dakota as a young professor of psychology. And after having the dissertation published, then I started a survey using personality inventories and questionnaire for people who are ET experiences or UFO reporters. And that study has continued on now. I have about another 500 responses, although not with the personality inventories, because I learned in the middle of the 60s that most of these people are, quote, normal, unquote, psychologically. That was a dissertation study that was done by Dr. June Parnell at the University of Wyoming in the middle of the 60s. So that gave me some confidence that not only was her work publishable, but also it was a good sample early on, despite all the claims from some people that ETs were invaders or intruders, or people who were reporting contacts were crazy. So it's been a long journey, but it's been a good journey.
So that was in the early 60s, before the Betty and Barney Hill story broke, before we knew about Roswell. What got you interested in this subject? How did you hear about it back in the 50s or something? I think you started, I listened to something, you actually started doing some of this research in the 50s. What got you started?
As a little boy, I had what I thought were nightmares, encounter with ET craft and so forth. I didn't have enough courage until I was about 50 years old to go through hypnosis with one of my colleagues, but went back to age 5 and 10 and recognized what I thought was a nightmare was actually a real memory, a true memory, that I was on board a craft with a tall guy on my left with his hand on my right shoulder. He was saying to me, "Leo, learn to read and write well. When you grow up, you can help other people learn more about their purpose in life." Well, what does a 10-year-old boy know about other people's purpose in life when he doesn't know about his own? So I kind of repressed those memories, but was interested when people like Betty and Barney Hill talked about their experience. I wrote to them, and they filled out forms participating in the survey. But before that, and like in '61, when I became a young professor at the University of North Dakota, I joined NICAP, that's the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and I joined APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in Tucson, Arizona. Soon found out that the NICAP people weren't really into the story about occupants. They were more interested in the craft. It's like, kicking the tires on the truck but not talking to the truck driver. And when I joined APRO, Jim and Coral Lorenzen were supportive of people investigating those cases. Dr. Frank Salisbury, a plant physiologist at Utah State, and Dr. James Harder, professor of engineering at Berkeley, they were early on investigators. And when I joined them, then we would go around whenever we could to talk with people about their encounters. So that was, it was good people I worked with, and they were very helpful in helping me ask questions. For example, Jim Harder used what's called a pendulum technique. It's kind of a hypnotic procedure, asking people to hold a pendulum and then ask questions, and then get what are called idiomotor responses, or body responses to questions. Well, I And I said, okay, I'm trained professionally in hypnosis, so that's a good avenue. And I started in the middle 60s, not only talking with people about their responses to the surveys, but also about their willingness to sit and talk, go through hypnosis procedures to learn more about any memory of their encounter.
Leo, what the memory that you got? What was it that made you define your experience on the craft as a nightmare? It's something frightening, I guess, is implied in that term. What happened in the craft that you remember?
I saw it as a nightmare when I was a 10-year-old kid, because I didn't have any place to put it. You know, it wasn't a memory that made sense to me. So when I was 50 years old, then I could say, okay, yeah, it happened. I was 10 years old. I was on board a craft. I was talking either verbally or mentally with a guy in what I would call a spacesuit, you know, in those days, in a one-piece outfit. And it was an encouraging message. It wasn't a frightening in the sense of terror, a little frightening in the sense of responsibility. I felt like I was supposed to respond. And that's the way many people I work with, sometimes their fear is not so much of the encounter with an extraterrestrial, it's the feeling that they have a job to do. They feel impelled to learn not only about their own experience, but they feel as if they are supposed to help Earth and humanity.
And so you got that mission as a child.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. You know, many people feel that this is part of their pattern. That is not only childhood experiences, but past life experiences. Just give you an example. Years ago, I was working with a young man from Colorado. He had been a student some years before that at the Northern Colorado University at Greeley. He was sitting in a chair, leaning back, and he had been a football player. He was 230 pounds, 6'4" guy, and his chair was shaking, and he was weeping. But his fear was not of the encounter with the extraterrestrials. His response was in regard to his own duty or his own chore or job. He had stayed overnight with a friend. During the middle of the night, he woke up feeling he should go downstairs. He goes downstairs, and outside there's a flying saucer and some extraterrestrial beings there. And he recognized them as family. He had come from that planetary system and now was in human form. And when they left, well, he wept. And so that's one example of many, many, many examples of people who not only feel that they are learning about themselves and their task, but also they feel like they should talk or publish a book, or they should become a nurse or a teacher. Many of these people, about 2/3 of them are women, and most of them are college level in education, and their occupations may vary, but their general personality characteristics are that they are more loving rather than more fearing, and they are more cooperative than resisting. In other words, in my view, they're good people who are not only learning about themselves, but they're learning how to deal with people around them.
Yeah, I have that stranger in a strange land phenomenon, feeling that I've been left behind, and that my soul is not from this sphere of influence. And a lot of people who contact these experiencers have that going on. Do you think that we incarnate on many planets besides this one? The people that come here, or do they agree to come and be born into human form, or do you think they walk in? What do you think is going on with those people?
Yeah, there seems to be several avenues. One of the questions that I've asked people over the years, not only about their education, not only about their occupational activities, but also about their ESP. When I started the survey in '62 at the University of North Dakota, part of the questionnaire was about ESP because I knew at that time that that was part of it. Some of these people seem to be rather psychic. They may have telepathic abilities or clairvoyant abilities, knowing what's going on around them. They seem to have a sense of people that's more significant and more full than other people. And then asking them questions about their attitudes regarding reincarnation. That came along a little later because I began to realize that many of these people during hypnosis sessions not only went back to childhood experiences, but they went back to what seemed to be life as ET on other planets or other galaxies. It's an area that has been explored by a lot of people. Dr. Stevenson, University of Virginia, has done a lot of studies and written several books. And also a former psychologist, Dr. Helen Wambach, she developed a questionnaire and workshop procedures involving thousands of people. My wife and I conducted hundreds of those kinds of workshops where people were asked to relax deeply, kind of a group hypnosis session, and then to respond to certain questions about a certain time period, what was going on in that lifetime, and what information came out of it. So it's fascinating to see how many people over the years not only respond to these kinds of questions, but they seem to be what I consider to be good people, helpful, compassionate people, not only regarding Mother Earth, but also regarding other humans. So whether they're called starseed or UFO experiences or ET experiencers, or some people talk about these little kids coming along. What are they called? Color? What color is
Indigo
it?
children.
Oh yeah, the indigo children or starseed. Many of these young children coming along seem to be not only bright and psychic, but they seem to be aware of who they are and where they're headed. One example, I was talking to a young boy, 8th grader, sitting in my chair, and he looked at me as a matter of fact when I asked him about his experiences, ET encounters, he and his sister, and didn't seem to be frightened by it. When I asked him about if he knows what he's heading toward, he said, "Oh yes. When I grew up," he said, "I'm going to be involved in terraforming." I said, "Terraforming?" I didn't know what that was. He said, "Yeah, he's going to be part of a crew that helps to rejuvenate Mother Earth. We've been depleting her, digging for fossil fuels. When for 80 years or so, the Nikola Tesla technology has been suppressed, just like the cancer cure technology of Royal Rife has been suppressed. And so he was talking as if that was going to be a new age, a new world, and he was going to be part of it.
Wow. I wanted to go back to Dr. Wambach. She progressed people into future lifetimes, and if I remember the books correctly, there were like 4 or so basic future lifetimes that these thousands of people were converging upon. And so you're talking about, here's a young man that's talking about a future lifetime that's be a positive one. That's good news to hear. What do you think? Are they Are we creating the future as a group with consensus reality? Are we able to affect those realities on that level? What we focus on, we can create. It seems like a lot of people now are so focused on some kind of Armageddon and it's supposed to happen in September and, yada, yada. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my bias is in the direction of a positive outcome. I know that there are writers in the past who have looked at other events, the ET, like a Dr. What's his name? Professor of history at Columbia University, Dave Jacobs, Dr. Jacobs. He wrote a book called Invaders. He saw the ETs as invaders, and Bud Hopkins saw them as intruders. Some people like Dr. Ken Ring, studying near-death experiences and ET experiences, he saw the ETs as more like instructors. And some people, like Dr. Jim Deardorff, and let's see, what's her name? She died some time ago and wrote many books. I'll think of her name in a minute. They saw ETs as, what's that?
Dr. Edith Fury?
Oh, she's good. Yeah, she's done a lot of work with experiences, and so has Paula Harris. I was thinking of a woman who's written several books on her communication with ETs, and I'll think of it in a moment. But they saw ETs as initiators, that is, helping humanity to go through a change, a shift, a growing up. The model that I like is the movie Wizard of Oz, where Judy Garland plays the part of Dorothy. And Dorothy thinks that she and her friends can go see the wizard and they'll get intelligence or courage or whatever it is that they're seeking. Well, they go through a series of tests, challenges, partly from nature, partly from demons, and through their own fears and their own doubts. And then when they get there, they find out that the wizard, he's kind of a bumbling old professor, and he's just handing out certificates. So we see this as a model that many people think that the ETs are either demons or angels, and we find out that they are learning about the universe and about themselves just as humans are. It's an ongoing process.
If somebody is a negative person, they have negative experiences, and if they're positive, they have positive. And then after you answer that, Dr. List.
Yeah, it's like I call it a giant puzzle in the sky, and we project onto the ETs who we are. Just like when we're kids going to school, some kids will see one teacher as really a great teacher, and other kids will see that same teacher as a devil, an angel devil.
In existential thought, we kind of look at, don't put that thing right in my mouth, honey, that's the microphone, that the other is really us too, and that if we can bridge the gap with the other and realize that we are one, then we simultaneously have our individuality and our unity with the perceived other. I think that's kind of what your teaching leads me to, too.
Yes, that's a good way to say it, right?
So, do you have any other experiences? I'm really curious about. You were aboard this craft when you were 10 years old. Have you remembered any more experiences in this life or maybe in past lives?
Yeah, I've gone through past life experiences, and some of them are kind of humdrum. I've been a lot of soldiers, crusaders, those kind of where I was guard for the Queen or those kind of experiences. Also, some memories of being in Tibet as a priest. So I've been kind of on both trails, the soldier, loyal soldier guard trail, but also the teacher, priest role. Nothing really spectacular, except from my view, one lifetime that's very interesting, because my wife and I seem to be part of that mystery where the story was that my wife Marilyn is just a beautiful woman, body, mind, and soul. In that lifetime, she was a queen, and in that lifetime, I was a guard, and I was helping her deal with lies which were told about her that she had caused the treasury to be dissipated. So the guards go back, get the bad guys, and bring the treasury back. So we hope that'll work out in this lifetime. Yeehaw. In general, my views about myself are that I can use my intelligence, I can use my education, and I can use my skills to be of service to other people, and that's what I've dedicated my work. I knew that when I was a college student back in the 40s. A buddy and I saw a flying saucer. We were coming out of the University Arts and Science building, Helms Hall, and we were playing a little game. A visiting scientist had talked about the basic observations of science, and so we were playing this little game. He said, "What do you see over there?" And I said, "Well, I see what I call a tree. It has a trunk, it has branches, it has limbs, it has twigs, it has leaves. I think it has roots, but I can't see them because the roots are in the ground." And then we looked over to the western sky, and he said, "What do you see over there?" And I said, "I don't know." It was about a fingernail at arm's length in size. It was kind of elliptical. There was a light around the edge, which I couldn't tell was whether it was internally generated or whether it was reflection from the setting sun. But it was what we called flying saucer. Well, I was puzzled. I was surprised. I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't want to talk to other people about flying saucers in those days because that was considered weird. The Army was clamping down on people who talked about flying saucers. That was about the time when Eisenhower left office, and he said to the public, "Beware the military-industrial complex." And according to Richard Dolan and other historians, the information about flying saucers and flying saucer occupants left the White House and went elsewhere. And so what they call them, the secret keepers or the financial controllers or the cabal, different names applied to whoever's behind the secrecy. The story went out that people who claimed to see flying saucers were silly or weird or confused. They didn't know Venus, they didn't know clouds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The view at that time was one of being doubtful or hesitant. Well, then a few years later, my wife and I had a sighting of an object or a craft over Boulder as we were returning from Denver. And the object hung in the night sky. It was just after sunset. And so the sky was darkening. And it was a glowing object or light. And it would hover, and it would move, and it would hover, move, and then move north. And so later, in a hypnosis session, I said I was being given telepathic messages that I'd be going to the north, and I felt like I was involved in flying saucer research. So those messages or those signs, whatever you want to call them, are just like a little milestones along the trail. You know, if you say, okay, 2 miles to Laramie, 1 mile to Laramie, you know you're heading toward Laramie. And so I knew I was heading toward more research, more investigation.
Wow.
Yeah, you talk about initiation with extraterrestrial contact as a hero journey, Campbell's hero journey, and I think that's a really useful framework for experiencers. I wonder if you would care to talk about how such encounters can be a hero journey where one is initiated, gets a gift for humanity, and has to pass tests. I love that. How does that?
Yeah, that's Campbell's hero's journey, and it's a nice model for individuals in general, if they see themselves, no matter whether they see themselves as UFO experiencers or ET encounter experiencers or not. But the idea is that the person is the story, and he or she may have doubts about the trail. Many athletes talk about this. When did they discover that they had confidence in their athletic ability versus when they were unsure of whether they could move from one team through high school. Same way about a person going through high school or college educationally. Many people describe the same thing vocationally. But this view is of a spiritual nature, that the person recognizes that he or she is not only human, but he or she is a soul. And that's the story that's exciting from my standpoint, that these people are saying to themselves, I've been through several lifetimes on Earth, been through many lifetimes on other planets. Some people I've worked with, they saw themselves in other lifetimes being rocks or being snakes or being animals. Well, once people get to the point where they are human, it seems like they continue on, just like a person getting a higher education continues on. And then the task is not only to find one's path, but to share it with other people. And that seems to be, as you were saying, the connection with other people is what is exciting, where people, it used to be the old physics was separation of spirit and matter. That was Newtonian physics. Well, now the modern physicists say everything is connected. And they have done experiments where the elementary particle will split, a slit experiment, and the energy goes through two places, and then combines again. And so the modern physicists are saying that all energy is connected, and matter is just one aspect of energy.
So you've been doing this research since the 60s, and you have all these surveys and all these sessions you've done with all these people over these many, many, many years. What is going on here? What kind of beings are they interacting with? Is there some kind of agenda? Is it connected to the ancient aliens? Are they still here? Were they different species back then? Who are the Anunnaki, et cetera, et cetera? What have you discovered based on all your years?
There are several scenarios, and I'll tell you the one I favor. From a standpoint of insiders, people who have talked with Army and Air Force people, they claim that some people claim there are as many as 22 civilizations that come and go on Earth. Some civilizations are animal-like, lizards or insectoid. Some are animal, like lions or other mammals. But many of the ETs are human-like. They, eyes, hands. Some may have claws, but hands, and in fact, that's one thing that early on the military, governmental people were worried about, because they looked just like humans, and so they were worried that there'd be infiltration, and that's when they started closing down, according to some people. But no matter how many groups there are, the question always is how do we respond to them? And I've heard the scenario of Star Wars, and maybe that's going on, that they're, good guy, bad guy, or two groups battling over Earth and over humanity, kind of like the scenario of the French soldiers and the English soldiers fighting about who's going to take over the American colony. That's one model. If that's going on, well, then that's what we got to do. We got to fight. Deciding which group you fight. Do you fight with the French, or you fight with the English, or like the American colonists, they decided to develop their own land. So some people argue that what's going on in the planet is a whole bunch of conflicts. I'll give you a couple of examples. I wrote an introduction recently to a book that will come out later this month. Dr. Raymond Keller, he's a PhD professor of history at West Virginia University, and his book is called Venus Rising. It's a detailed history of the colonization of the planet by various groups, and the struggle that seems to be going on now between Martians and Venusians. Some years ago there was a popular book by a writer called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And that seems to be...
Oh, yeah, Gray.
That seems to be the way he's seeing the history. I'll come back to that later.
What's his source of information? Is it channeled? Is it the whistleblowers?
Some of this from whistleblowers. For example, there's a book called After Disclosure, AD After Disclosure, by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel, that gives 6 or 7 scenarios that might lead to disclosure. And disclosure could come about because whistleblowers, when they are on their deathbed, talk about what their Army experience or their Air Force or their Navy experience or whatever, and that's happening quite often. But according to those authors, it'll take more than deathbed confessions by military people to get disclosure. So there are other things.
You said that in some of your writing that disclosure has already taken place. It's just that the media and the power elite are propagandizing that it ain't.
Yeah, it depends on whether, of course, what I want is full public disclosure, where President Obama and the leaders of this nation and that nation all come together. There are some rumors that Pope Francis might say something about ETs when he's speaking before Congress in late September. I don't know if those rumors will be true or not, but it's kind of exciting. Pope Francis is an interesting guy. His name, his title, comes from an earlier Pope Francis of Assisi. And one of my clients years ago, she's deceased now, but she had an interesting quote. She was kind of a firebrand. She would criticize men for their patriarchal attitudes. She said it's one thing for a patriarch to protect women and children, but it's another thing for a patriarch to possess women and children. And anyway, she found a quote from the earlier St. Francis that says, "Preach the gospel always. If necessary, use words." And I love it. I think that's the way that true Christians, they talk, but they also practice what they preach. They are compassionate and kind. And many people I know who call themselves Christian are patriarchs. They are still beholden to Jehovah. the male God. They think God is male. They don't understand that God is both male and female. And so they're not Christian according to Jesus, who said, I come from a loving God. In fact, there's a version, I don't know if you've seen it. I can't remember if I sent a copy to you, by a guy who claims that the Lord's Prayer, quoting Jesus, starts off, if it comes from the Aramaic right directly to the English, not from the Aramaic to the Greek to the Latin to the German and then to the English. It starts off, oh, okay, yeah, it starts off saying, "O cosmic birther." Yeehaw. If God is both male and female, and a cosmic birther, that's quite different than a male God who doesn't know how to give birth. So many times the people who call themselves Christian are still dealing with a patriarchal male God rather than a goddess God of creation. And so in this book, Venus Rising, Dr. Keller has done an interesting thing. He's shown that some evidence suggests that the Martians settled in Atlantis and the Venusians settled in Lemuria in the Pacific. And then when those civilizations went under, the priesthood settled in Egypt, the Lemurian priesthood in southern mountains of Egypt, and the Atlantean priesthood settled in the Nile Valley, northern Egypt. And so the Egyptians had both the male god as well as the female goddess. And finally the pharaohs, they decided that they should go with Jehovah, the male god. And same way with Moses, he said that he was told, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," which means there are other gods, there are other ETs, but let's go with the male patriarchy. And so many Christians have doubts about whether they should go with Venus or whether they should go with Mars. And now we see a big surge among some men to grow beards and to be fierce. In the Middle East, the patriarchs are fighting, and their motto is, "My loving God is more loving than your loving God, and if you don't believe it, I'll kill you."
Right.
So it seems now we're at the crisis point, not only in terms of religious attitudes, but also in terms of military secrecy, governmental secrecy about the ETs. According to some people, that crisis is coming to a head, and that we're involved in a change in energy or a change in consciousness. And in fact, in Dr. Keller's book, he has a section on the genome project. Are you familiar with the genome, trying to figure out the human DNA code? And some experts claim that we have a series of genes called junk DNA that are extraterrestrial, but they don't want to talk about it. And if that's true, then the other code makers who say that a signal could be sent and humanity might shift if our genetic code shifted. The other book I wanted to mention that is so interesting now is a new version, a new edition of a book by Krisanna Duran, K-R-S-A-N-N-A, Krisanna. Her last name is Duran, D-U-R-A-N. She's an editor and publisher in Missoula, Montana. And she's written a book called The Web of Life and Cosmos. Now the new edition has update on her work on the history of humanity, human origins, and just like the book by Dr. Keller, it's very complex. It seems like we have Arcturians, Martians, Lemurians, a lot of different Venusians. We have a lot of different racial groups that have come and gone, and some have stayed on planet Earth. And so we seem to be a kind of a mix of, the brown, black, it used to be a blue, red, yellow, white races, as well as the different religious views that these people have. And so it sounds to me, my bias is that the Star Wars is already over, and now we're trying to decide on planet Earth if we are more Martian and male and fearing God, or if we're more Venusian and more female and we are loving God. So if that's true, it's a big conflict, and it won't be settled by fighting. It'll be settled by loving, because love is stronger than fear.
Well, we're entering the age of Aquarius, which was Enki, and I wonder, in your cosmology, how the Zecharia Sitchin and the Anunnaki information fits in with what you're discovering. Because a lot of what you said, we're Anunnaki researchers who study with Sitchin, and other researchers would fit right in there. It's great that we're getting this whole greater picture. And also, I just want to say, sounds like we're going from Star Wars to Star Trek, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, our informants, the Anunnaki, have said that the battle between Nanar, the king of Nibiru, and Marduk, who has been in charge, has been superseded by the Galzu, a higher level, who have brought together to end this strife on Earth. But from an intellectual perspective, if everything is in the mind of the all, of God, then we have to conclude that the adversity we're facing is all part of our evolutionary challenge to take the hero journey.
Yes, some people say that the Nephilim, Zecharia Sitchin's work, suggesting that there were different views about humanity, whether humanity should be extinguished by a flood or whether humanity should be saved. And some authors claim that what was decided was to just confuse us, the Tower of Babel, so that instead of being coordinated and cooperative, we are in conflict because we speak different languages, we have different religions and views, rather than being cooperative, because then we'd be seen as a threat by the gods who don't want us to get too big for our britches.
Well, we were outnumbering them in force. There's only a couple thousand of them around the planet, and we were in the millions, so they had to confuse us. So when they started to, Nana got hurt at the Battle of Troy, and they realized, we can hurt these creatures. We can perhaps kill them. So they started to confuse the language. They probably started before that.
Way before that.
Way before that. But that was, the interaction. They had to go back up into the ziggurats and create the priesthoods and the kingship. What was your question, Josh?
It's been answered.
Okay. Back to you, Leo. With that question, you have more to say.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Would you like us to ask another question, or do you have more to say before we go into a question?
The only thing I would say is that I'm optimistic that if we can get into this new age or this new period of time, rising of energy and consciousness, then I'm hoping that disclosure of the extraterrestrial technologies will take place. We know about Tesla and we know about Royal Rife, so we don't have to suffer with cancer. We don't have to dig gas and coal and oil out of Mother Earth. We can just create our own electricity. Then we can have food, shelter, clothing, education for all of humanity. That's my hope.
That's my hope as well. Sasha, question?
Oh, well, this is a good one for me. You said that the average extraterrestrial experiencer is more scientifically motivated than the average professional scientist. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, if one takes my definition of new science, years ago, a professor at CSU had conferences on new science, the quantum physics view that everything is connected versus the view that matter and spirit are separate, as in Newtonian. That's the old science. So, yeah, the people I work with, they seem to be more scientific-minded, in my view, because they see everything as connected.
Okay, sorry about that. It was an alarm going off. What I want to do is go back and get a little bit more detail. So, I support the goal that we're going to, and I know that all these, a lot of the technologies originated with Tesla. That always brought me to mind. Was Tesla really a human being? Was he an extraterrestrial? Was he one of them that was walking among us and bringing us information? Who was Jesus, Buddha?
Leonardo.
All these other people that seem to be way in advance of their contemporaries in the different eras. What are your thoughts on that?
On that Tesla, I had trouble hearing all you said. It was about Tesla?
Tesla and all the other, teachers that have walked among us, like Buddha and and Jesus.
Yeah, that's one thing that's interesting about Dr. Keller's book, Venus Rising. He has several sources which lead him to claim that Tesla came out of Venus, and so did Jesus. If that's true, then they would represent the love angle rather than the Martian fear angle. And so there are several references in his book about Tesla, as well as many references about the life of Jesus. And I'm pleased because my bias is that love is stronger than fear. There's a book called Power versus Force by a physicist, David Hawkins, and he has developed a map of consciousness. It runs all the way from shame, low, fear, hate, anger, pride, on up into neutrality, into love and enlightenment. And he argues that the U.S. public is moving from about middle level in general to a little higher level. If he's right, and if these other people are right about the children coming into the planet, then we see more and more people who represent power rather than representing force. And my bias is that the people who are fearful and angry are on the last legs. If you don't mind my getting a little political, Donald Trump to me represents to me the patriarch in full bloom. He's out on the stage and he's singing his last aria.
Leo, I wonder, I see that you're using Venus as standing for the feminine or yin principle, but some of our informants, like we interviewed Olmec and others who have said, no, there's a surface a colony on Mars, and most Martians are below the surface. And I'm wondering how you're using the Venus. Is it just as a metaphor for the feminine, or are you alluding to the actual planet?
Both. Keller describes the astronomical evidence first, and then he talks about the Venusians as a race or as a civilization, and their interaction with humans, so that some of us probably come from both civilizations, in terms of background, just like a person could be, quote, Chinese, unquote, and yet have come over to China from Italy, or vice versa. Could have a person who's Italian, but Chinese in looks. So the evidence that they present is Chrisana Duran and Raymond Keller. The evidence that they present is very impressive to me, and my bias is that we've had several civilizations, including the tall whites, who settle on Earth, and that now the task is for the leadership not only to recognize the extraterrestrial influence in our history, but also to recognize that the extraterrestrials are here, they're among us. There's an interesting book called The End of Men and the Rise of Women by a woman named Hannah, H-A-N-N-A, Rosin, R-O-S-I-N. Chapter after chapter, she shows that women are the emerging leaders in the military, in the medicine, in academic world, business world, all around the planet. In the U.S., the only two areas which it's not yet true is the U.S. Congress and mega corporations, although that's changing. More and more women are becoming leaders in the U.S. Congress, and more women are becoming leaders in mega corporations.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Janet Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson, and our very special guest, Dr. Leo Sprinkle. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button. Revolution Radio is listener-supported, and please do take a few moments and donate what you can, $1, $5, $15, $20, even $100. Whatever you can spare is greatly appreciated, and we do thank you very much for your donation, because Your donations allow us to bring shows like this and the many other great shows that are on Studio A and B on Revolution Radio. And with that, we're getting back to our show. Dr. Lesson, what would you like to say?
I just want to hear Leo speak some more.
Okay, Leo. Welcome back to the second half of our show. I'm very fascinated with the emerging cosmology of the universe. We were talking about beings coming from Venus and from Mars and all these other parts of the universe. Is this human species, like are the Venusians able to breed with the Martians? Are they one species? What are we finding? So the species is, from my definition, what I understand, is they can reproduce naturally without the cloning process. They could mate and copulate and have offspring. What are you finding is going on in the universe? Are the Greys able to reproduce with you? Excuse me. Are the Greys able to reproduce as humans? Are the reptilians, et cetera, et cetera? What are you finding in your research? Are you on mute, Dr. Sprinkles? Leo? Are you back? Are we still on? Hello, everybody. Okay, would you like to talk while I see with Sean if we're still on? Okay, he's addressing something, please. Stand by. Okay. We're still on the air. We have a message. Sorry, I guess
this is Leo Sprinkle. This is Leo.
We got cut off a little bit.
We got cut off, and I asked you to elaborate, so I'll ask it again. And welcome back to the show. I was fascinated by the story that's emerging about the history of perhaps the entire universe, and especially our galaxy. And it seems that there's a whole strain of humanoid type species. There's reptilians, mantis, beings that look like animals. In your research, with the books that you're following up and the different experiencers that you're talking to, what is going on? Are these beings able to reproduce, to copulate, to have offspring through their natural mating process rather than cloning? Does that mean this is the same species that has been going through the cosmos and populating the universe? And reptilians breed with rays and all this. What are you finding?
Yeah, the people I work with in terms of hypnosis to recall more about their encounters, most of these people tend to report either the Greys or the human-like entities. The stories of lizards and insects, mantis, praying mantis, other types seem to be coming from other people than ones I work with. The people who come for either comfort or for exploration are puzzled by their encounters, but they don't seem to be quite as traumatized as some I've read about. One story that I got a kick out of, a woman said she was being examined on a table by a little Gray, and she said, "Stop it. I want to talk to who's in charge." And she claimed that her memory was that the little Gray looked at her puzzled and walked away and came back with a larger Gray who was much more intelligent and much more compassionate. And so many people have talked about their encounters as cold and as unloving, but other people have talked about human examiners. What Melinda, what's her name? Melinda has talked about military abductions, that people feel they've been abducted by humans, and the humans want to find out more about their ET encounters, and so they are taking them and finding out what they can. If that's true, then there seems to be an ongoing game about who is important to be examined and who is important to be surveyed. But the people I've worked with, they seem to have been what I'd say much more intelligent, much more courageous, and they're just puzzled about what their task is. So I've been fortunate to work with hundreds and hundreds of people who I feel are not only learning about themselves, but helping Mother Earth and helping humanity.
One of my clients whom I regressed talked about having an implant in a past life, and that sort of opened up this whole, which then carried on somehow through different incarnations. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between reincarnation and extraterrestrial contact.
Yeah, from my standpoint, the people can get knowledge by various means. Some people feel like they get an implant, which is a little device that may be in their nose or somewhere in their body, and they get information that way. Some people feel like they get implanted knowledge, as if they get what they call a download. I'm not a computer guy, so I don't know what that means, but they feel as if they have been flooded with information, not only about past lives, but about future and humanity. And other people feel like they are being given information in conversation, with ET. So it's like a kid in school who might sit down with a teacher and get information, or might go to his or her computer, get information, or from other kids. So a lot of different sources of information, and from my viewpoint, the people who learn about their past lives often see themselves as, quote, growing up. That is, as if they came here purposefully to be human. They came here as a project to be compassionate to others and to be cooperative and help humankind achieve a new age of peace and harmony.
Yeah, that really coincides with it. What I find is that people tend to symbol things idiosyncratically, individually, but in a way, they're just using the metaphors and analogies available to them to describe the elephant of reality, which is what we're all feeling.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. And for many people, there are what they call coincidences. Carl Jung, the MD psychoanalyst, Swiss, he called it synchronicities, that things happen, but it's not cause and effect as we know it at the human level. It seems like the cause and effect is at a higher level, and we're just part of it. It's just like when people gather. A woman named Shirley Parrish years ago wrote a nice little book about ET experiences called When Eagles Gather. And she was saying that these ET experiencers are souls that have been summoned to come together in a common cause. So that seems to be, many people feel like, why am I here? Oh, I've got a job to do.
Wow. Okay, I'm trying to find what I had a question. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Newton and his institute and his thousands of hypnotherapists doing regressions and progressions to their lives, between lives? They're finding a strong correlation with some of the people that seem to be more advanced souls and able to manage their energy, that they have lifetimes on other planets, and that extraterrestrials are choosing to come and be born into human bodies. Have you found any of that in your research?
Say the name again. I didn't quite get that.
Dr. Michael Newton, and he's retired now, but he created the Michael Newton Institute, and there are several thousand hypnotherapists that are trained, which they take their clients to a deep theta state, and they access their memories of their life between lives. Where do we go when we die? What goes on there? And they, no matter what, yeah. Go ahead.
Would you say the name again, Dr. Michael
Newton? Newton. Anyway, they're finding that have ET incarnations, and so that was just another connection to souls have ET incarnations.
Yes,
so what have you been finding?
Similar
souls
findings.
They have ET origins. They originated from another planet, another sphere of influence. They didn't come from the Barda where we go when we die. They came from outside our soul pool, where we have our pool. Our souls go to rest in between lives. So some souls come in from planets to our place where we're resting and decide to have human incarnations. Have you been finding any of that in your research?
Oh yes, that's true. Just like Mary Rodwell of Australia. Anybody who does this kind of work will find that over and over and over, people will describe themselves as having been extraterrestrial. Now they're human on the planet, but they still remember their extraterrestrial origins.
So where do you think this is going? Do you have any, is there a time frame? Are we on a future where this is going to happen? You mentioned this is probably a place where we're having, it's like a university. I heard you on another interview, you thought that Errol McGray from the Roswell interview, the alien interview, she described it as a prison planet. Is this a university or a prison planet or both? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some people have seen it as a zoo. The ETs are here to look at the animals. So whether we're a zoo or a university or a prison or all of the above, it seems to me that the people who describe these scenarios are talking about their own evolution. So, you could talk with a high school senior and she might be excited about the future. You could talk to another high school senior and he might be pissed about what's going on. So it's not the school, it's not the teachers, it's the individual students that we're talking about. And the people I talk with, the common view or the common theme is of a positive, a hope that in the next couple of months disclosure occurs publicly all over the planet about the energy technologies, Tesla getting electricity without using fossil fuels. Because many experts say that that's what the big secret is. It's not the ET presence that's the secret. It's the energy technologies. Dr. Stephen Greer has been saying this for years. There are several disclosure projects. Stephen Greer, the MD, Dr. Michael Sala, political scientist from Australia, Stephen Bassett, and then also Dr. Jones, C.B. Scott Jones of Texas, who's a PhD political scientist and a former Navy commander, and kind of an insider as far as knowing some of the people who kept the secret for years and years. So several disclosure projects if they are successful in helping the secret keepers who know that their days are numbered, they can see what's going on. Women are becoming leaders. Women are more compassionate. They're more open. They're less competitive than men. Just as Hannah Rosen has said in her book, The End of Men and the Rise of Women. So that the model or the vision or the hope or the bias, whatever you want to call it, my view is that within the next few months, it's very likely that there will be disclosure all around the planet, not only of energy technologies and the ET presence, but also that we will be talking more towards peace and harmony rather than war and conflict.
Have you ever been sanctioned or put pressure on because you have been disclosing so much, or is that not touched you?
Yeah, I haven't been pressured like some people have. Some people have had threats from military types. There's a story told by, what is his name? He wrote a book, a colonel from the Army. I'll think of it in a moment. He developed a little electrical apparatus, kind of like a Tesla generator, to collect electricity, be enough for a household, a home. And he said that a couple of guys in Army camouflage outfits, crew cuts, held him up against the wall and said, "You will continue to use oil, will you not?" That's a kind of a story that shows he was threatened. And some people have been killed, according to persons I've talked with, sons and daughters of military people who spoke out about their knowledge of extraterrestrials. But I've never had any kind of threat like that. I think that most people, they probably see me as an old professor who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, so I'm not seen as a political threat. However, when I was younger, I was pressured at the University of Wyoming. I was a professor there for 25 years, and I went from associate professor of counseling, teaching in the Guidance Institute, when I first got here in Wyoming in '64. Then I moved into the psychology department, became an assistant professor of psychology, became an associate professor of psychology, and then I tried to become professor of psychology. At that time, I had about 50 publications, and the teaching was good. I was known as a good teacher. I was a fair administrator, fair in the sense of mediocre. I was the director of the counseling center for 13 years. But then when I started talking publicly about UFO research and reincarnation research, I was reprimanded both in writing and face-to-face by the vice president. He was a good Christian patriarch, and I was told that I should restrict my reincarnation research and UFO research to out of office hours. I was a professor, which meant I could study anything I wanted to study, but I was also a staff psychologist. I had resigned as director of counseling and testing after 13 years because of the pressure. So when I was told that I should not talk about that in office hours, I said, "Oh, okay, I can play that game." So I would work at 5 p.m. For example, a residence hall counselor came to me with a student who was a cutter. He would cut himself with a razor blade, his arms or his shoulders. And so I started working with him, and I said, "Let's learn self-hypnosis." He was a very bright guy. I'd seen his chart. He was brighter than most professors, much brighter than I am. And he looked at me evenly, and he said, "Why should we learn self-hypnosis?" Well, he'd been through a psychiatrist and a couple of psychologists, and so I knew that I had to do a little something different in order to help him change. I said, well, we know that you're going to cut yourself, so we want you to be able to focus and really do a good job. Well, he had a good sense of humor. He laughed and said, oh, okay. So we started on self-hypnosis, and then we started meeting at 5 o'clock instead of during the day, because we were going back to past lives. And he was a swordsman, and he was cutting and killing others, and others were cutting and killing him. And so we got to the nexus. We got to the difficulty that he was experiencing. He was very bright, and he was very psychic, and he could look at a person, and he could size them up instantly. And he could say something a little snotty, and the other person would say something a little snotty, and he'd say something snotty, and they'd say something snotty, and pretty soon they were going at it. Well, then he would go home and he would cut himself because it was more moral to cut himself than it was to cut others. So he said, why don't you use your sharp tongue to cut through arguments instead of cutting other people? I don't know what happened to it, but he was going to finish a 3-year program in economics, and he was going to go to law school. So he was going to have both law and economic background. He was going to become an international banker, and I have no doubt that he'd be successful because he was very, very sharp. So that's an example of saying, okay, I'll play the game as the vice president dictates. Well, then I began to find out that wasn't the end game. The end game was to get Leo out, and I was told to do an experiment on hypnosis to find out if hypnosis is real. I said it is not real. Real means things, R-E-A, Latin for rea. I said hypnosis is true. It's a true process. It's a true state. And I said I have 13 years of data, students and staff and faculty who came to what we call the self-improvement program, teaching people self-hypnosis for study habits or for work or stress release or whatever. So I had a lot of data, but I know that wasn't sufficient. I had to do an experiment. So I knew I was on my way out. And the next thing I was told, I said, okay, that's it. So in 1989, I resigned and went into private practice. So after 25 years at the university, I could be professor emeritus, but not of psychology, because my application to become a professor of psychology was turned down. When it was turned down, there was one professor, he looked at me, he didn't know me, he said, now, Leo, if you'll do this kind of a study and this kind of a study, you can get them published in this kind of a journal, and you can become professor of psychology. Hello?
Sorry for the interference.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
He said,
going to the show or something, but I blocked him because we don't want any calls.
Okay.
Continue. Go ahead.
Well, we're talking about, you can see that you were punished, or they thought they were punishing you, but maybe you were being freed.
Right, to do the next phase of your...
Yeah, that's the way to look at it. I said to myself, I was so busy, and Marilyn was so helpful. So the thing to do is to look at it, okay, now I'm out of the university and I can be in private practice, so I can continue on my work. So it worked out fine. That's
great. So you ended up doing what you were supposed to do, and so in your private practice you were regressing people. What was your private practice like?
Yes.
Any regressions of this?
Did normal psychological work, hypnosis, and assistance, but then also did work with people in terms of past lives. My wife and I did reincarnation workshops on the weekend because my salary went down from about $40,000 a year to about $20,000 a year. So it took some lumps economically, but it was good professional work.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
Michael Lee Hill has said that you can help people. They don't have to be physically present, that you have ways of communicating and helping them. Could you tell us a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I'm retired now, so I'm not able to do the work that I did earlier. But many years ago, I would pray every day to be a better psychologist. And of course, in those days, I thought that meant left brain, technical, rational, scientific, masculine, blah, blah, blah. Well, as I prayed every day to be a better psychologist, I'd get little impressions of people. And I said, have you ever felt such and such, or have you ever done such and such? And the person looked at me, how did you know? So I became more aware of my psychic awareness, and then I developed a little protocol. I thought of my work with spirit guides, and I would ask questions of people, and they would tell me what their concerns were, and then I'd ask my guides for information. I conducted surveys. I've got hundreds and hundreds of surveys over the years, and many people said that the impressions were helpful to them on a scale from 0 to 10. Then one woman said, okay, Leo, do a reading for me, long distance. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, just talk into a tape recorder and send it to me. And so I said, I'm not sure I can do that. She said, oh, sure you can. So I asked my guides, and they said yes. So one year I was talking to about 500 people in Denver. Should we be doing something else?
No, somebody keeps trying to call in. I'm not sure how to block them. Anyway, just continue. I'm going to
let that sound take a deeper.
I'll finish my story. I'll finish my story, and I'll be glad to respond to questions.
I don't think it's the show. I think it's my computer's on with Skype, so I'm just muting my computer. But I have my computer on so I can get messages from my producer. So anyway, I think I got it blocked that way. It's not the show. That wouldn't come.
Okay. Well, after the talk to people in Denver, this man came up. He was holding a white cane in one hand, and he was holding onto the shoulder of his friend with the other hand. He was visually blind, but he was clairvoyant. And he said, I can see your guides. And I said, can you tell me about them? Because whenever I'd ask them, who are you? And they said, oh, it doesn't matter. Well, he said he could see on my left a Native American who was moving my hands. On my right, an orange-robed monk, Tibetan or Chinese, who was choosing the words. And then a blue light from extraterrestrial sources that was bringing the information. So I thought, oh, okay, good. And then after that, I learned that I got a female guide who was more healing, and then a couple of other ET guides. So I'm blessed to have spirit guides who can share information with the people I was working with.
Does Marilyn have any of the same guides as you?
No, she's a piano teacher, and she's very bright and very sensitive. She's psychic, but she doesn't go for public demonstrations.
I wanted to revisit the disclosure and the ramifications of all these things that are possibly going to happen, which I am fantasizing and hope will happen. One of which is the longevity, extreme longevity, perhaps reaching physical immortality, and maybe even reversing a lot of the symptoms of aging. Dr. Aubrey Gray says that aging is a disease and it's curable just like all the other diseases. So what would happen if you suddenly were back to being about the age of 25 or 30? How would you like that, and how would you handle it?
That would sound fantastic. Let's go for it. Right now I'm 85, and I've got an old body that's losing stamina and a mind that's losing memory. So having a more youthful opportunity would be grand.
Well, that's one of the things that Dr. Aubrey Gray and the Methuselah Foundation and his other organization, which I don't have it in my mind right now, but people can Google Dr. Aubrey de Grey from Cambridge, is he's saying that the 256 strands of junk DNA are not junk. And, that correlates with Sidge's information about the Anunnaki. They turned off some of our DNA. But we have the same life expectancy that they do, basically, if things are restored. And they live to be hundreds of thousands of years. And Dr. Aubrey de Grey, who does not research any of the UFO stuff, he comes from the scientific arena. He basically says that about half of the people alive today live to be 1,000 if these technologies are released. And by that time, 1,000 years from now, we will reach escape velocity and physical immortality. So what do you think of all that? Are you finding any evidence of that?
That's very exciting. I'm not familiar with that work, but I'll be pleased to learn more about it. The section in Dr. Keller's book, Venus Rising, intrigued me, where the junk DNA or the extraterrestrial DNA seems to be something that could be possible if a signal, for example, from Venus were broadcast to Earth, and then our DNA code would change. And this is what some people claim is happening now, that we're going through a shift in consciousness. It may also be a shift in our DNA. I certainly feel like I'm going through some kind of a change, but that may be just old age.
Well, if we didn't have the DNA, if we are able to shift consciousness and do our own DNA, or not dependent on, science and some outside intervention, that's what we've been exploring. What do you, our thoughts or deeds? Can we indeed do that? What do you think?
I don't have any good ideas myself, but I'd be glad to learn more about what other people are saying. Keller's work would suggest that that we have been programmed from the start by whoever built us, and that we have a tentative code. Like some people say, our DNA, and then we have 3% and 97% junk DNA. But others say, no, that's not junk DNA. That's extraterrestrial DNA. So that we may be programmed for this moment, for this time, to move from what I call planetary persons to cosmic citizens. That we just don't think of ourselves as earthlings or solar system or galactic. We think of ourselves as cosmic, and that we belong to other brothers and sisters throughout the cosmos. That's my hope.
Right, and so is that what you're referring to, the ascension? And if we were to have, well, to me it looks like it's two different levels. If we have the human type level of disclosure, that will cause an avalanche of other things to happen, like you mentioned earlier. What was it about the energy systems? What are some of the things that you think will happen if we get the normal type exposure, where perhaps maybe the ETs will simultaneously show themselves across the planet in the sky so no one can doubt, or maybe our governments might release it? What are some of the ramifications and things that will emerge from that level of disclosure?
Yes, not only the disclosure of energy technologies, which could change our economic system from a fossil fuel economy to a free energy economy. Not only the ET presence, so that ETs could come and talk to us publicly. I suppose at first it'd be holograms, because they wouldn't have to be afraid somebody would shoot at them. But there's a group headed by a woman named Carol Druhl, Druehl, Carol Druhl, called IHCI. It's the Institute for Human Cosmic Interaction. And she's trying to attract people who are wealthy to support the disclosure and to communicate openly with extraterrestrials. So my view would be that not only could we have a different planetary community, financially, occupationally, educationally, socially, religiously, but also that we could cooperate with other civilizations so that our children or grandchildren could be traveling not only to Mars and back, but could be traveling to other galaxies and back. So it would look much different than it does now, where we are afraid of one another and the people are at each other's throats over who owns what. You know, the Native American, they thought that nobody owned the water or the land, that the Mother Earth and Father Sky were the guardians. Now we take the point of view that it's possible for white man to own land and to decide whether people could be slaves and work the cotton fields. So we no longer think that that's the way to go, but we're still slaves to the system, where 1 or 2% of people have more control over their finances than 90% of people on the planet. If we had free energy,
right,
then every little village, every little couple, man and woman, or man and man, or woman and woman, could have a little generator of electricity, and then they could have a little plot for land, so everybody could have food and shelter, clothing, education. And then if they wanted to work, yahoo. If they didn't want to work, they could become a professor, or they could to write poetry or sing songs. So my view of the New Age is that it's an opportunity not only to grow up intellectually, but also to share socially.
It seems to me that one of the consequences of disclosure is once you start going down the rabbit hole, you'll also start disclosing the truth about the false flags, like the bombing of the Twin Towers, and blaming it in this ridiculous way on people that obviously could not have perpetrated it. And so that the last gasp of the power elite to prevent disclosure has to do with protecting themselves. And we probably need some kind of reconciliation and tell the truth, and we won't punish you. And yet there'll be a lot of angry people whose beloveds have been murdered by the power elite and their minions. And so I don't know, maybe that's just my paranoid view of things. Could you respond to that?
I would agree with that, because what's his name? Jim Mars, M-A-R-R-S.
Mars.
I like his telephone message. He said, "Hello, you've reached Mars." Well, he has written about the 9/11 attack, and I think that Wyoming and former Vice President Dick Cheney and others will have a lot to answer for about what happened on 9/11, because it seemed like the surveillance on some of the Saudis ceased, and the Army helicopters were pulled back, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks as if the timing of our actions was important in terms of timing of the 9/11 attack, and yet that was the reason why we could go in and bomb Iraq. So I think one of these days we'll find out that USA has a sordid history in that Middle East conflict, all because of oil. And when we no longer need oil to generate electricity, then we don't need that kind of conflict.
Do you think we're, with this reconstruction of our global society, and we are a global society already, we are definitely economically codependent, independent with each other, But do you think that we will use money? Alex Collier says that the extraterrestrials don't use money. What do you think will happen when we redo the system? What do you think will happen in place?
I'm not knowledgeable enough of economics to know about that. But it would seem like currency, and this is what some people fear. If we don't use currency, then we're locked into computers, and so some people fear the government more than they fear the corporations that are controlling the government, which is kind of strange to me, because which is worse, the boss or the boss of the boss, and I don't know what will happen financially, but I do know that it would be possible if we had the leadership, and of course with women as leaders I would be more hopeful if we have the leadership that allows not only for the use of Tesla technology, but also the sharing of the technology, then we wouldn't see these stories of the refugees who are dying of thirst and dying of bombs in the very countries where the patriarchs are fighting over who's boss.
Right. And then we've been discussing lately on our little global community that meets on the internet and radio shows about a basic minimum income. Human beings individually, in some sense, we didn't ask to be born. So how can we be charged to live on a planet we didn't ask to be born into, is what Alex Collier said he talked to the Andromedans about. And so there's talk about a basic minimum income where everybody's needs would get met, for food, clothing, shelter. What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, with free energy, that's possible. And it doesn't mean that people have to be limited to wages. For example, if a person has food, shelter, clothing, education, then the question is, do I need more? Well, if I need more, then work. And of course, work could be, a person could be building generators, or sharing the load, or teaching, or whatever. But then the workload and the payload might differ. Some people are willing to work at a job that they like or that they love, no matter what. I've known many teachers who were bright and educated, and they could have gone into a different occupation and made more money. But that was their passion. Same way my younger brother, when he was alive, my older brother, when he was alive, they were both middle-level management. My older brother in the Air Force, my younger brother in business. They were both smokers, and I think that led to their earlier death. But they were making more money than Leo was making as a professor. But I enjoyed being a professor, and so my feeling, this is not a good financial expert comment, but my feeling is that with free energy, people will have their needs met, and then they can decide whether they want more, for going on vacation or for having a bigger home or whatever. They could have more by going to work, but they wouldn't have to work if there were free energy, and everybody could use that free energy for basic human need.
Questions?
No, I just, could you give a visualization to our listeners so that they can carry on some of this work on their own?
Would you ask that again, please?
Dr. Lesson was talking about doing a visualization, but first I think we'd like to talk a little bit more about consciousness and the role of consciousness, and what do we mean by that? There's a question here: how do our loving and hateful thoughts affect all of creation and our existence here on Earth? What is the role of consciousness? What is what does that mean? If you can kind of elaborate on that for our listeners.
Oh, yeah, I think that when people get to a certain stage of spiritual development, they look beyond themselves, and that whether one sees that as a mental vision or whether one sees it as being kind to one another, just like the earlier St. Francis said, preach the gospel always, if necessary, use words. To me, that shift in consciousness is going on, and I think it will happen. And then if that's true, then everyone will be aware. It'll be like the disclosure. It's happening here and there a little bit at a time, but if it happens worldwide, then everybody who listens to radio or who watches TV would be aware that humanity is not only connected, but we're connected to other civilizations throughout the cosmos. That's what I see as being a cosmic citizen.
And so, what is the role of religion? You were talking about God is everywhere, and that the physics is talking about the whole universe is God. Tell us a little more about the role of religion and how we can go from the current state to the cosmic consciousness and awareness of God as a universal construct.
Yeah, most religious leaders seem to view the whole world, the whole cosmos, as God, Goddess. It's here on Earth that we see ETs as gods, and so we argue over whether the ET Jehovah is a better god than the goddess Venus, or we argue whether the Arcturians are stronger than the Martians, or the Martians stronger than the Venusians. That's to me, those are human reactions to our history rather than spiritual reactions to our history. So I see the whole universe as the goddess God of creation, and I pray to the goddess God, not to the Jehovah that I prayed to when I was a little boy. I remember when I was a little boy in Methodist school, or Methodist church, and we had a class downstairs. We had a new minister and his wife, and they were such beautiful people. He would have, during his sermon, he would have a little kid come up, and he would come down and talk to the little child in front of the whole congregation. And during the Sunday school lesson, there was one kid who was messing up another kid's hair and teasing him and pushing him off his chair. And the minister's wife came in. I thought, boy, he's going to get it now, because I was raised with a dad who had love in his heart, but he also had his hand on the razor strap. And if we lost a tool or if we didn't do our chores, well, the razor strap would come off the wall, and it would sing its song, and we'd do our dance. So when this kid was confronted by the minister's wife, I thought, boy, she's really going to show him. And instead she sat down and she talked to him. What a concept. And when she sat down and talked with him, well, he straightened out and he did better, because he just needed a little love and a little attention. And so, to me, that's what's happening with the ETs. They're sitting down with us and they're trying to talk to us, help us get through this period of patriarchal conflict, and I'm hoping we'll get through it quickly.
Wow. Gosh, okay. So, let's see. I wanted to look at it just one more time. We may have covered this, but maybe just look at it one more time. So how do our loving and hateful thoughts affect all the creation and our existence here on Earth? they say thoughts are deeds, and this is the law of attraction and action. This is moved from this worldview that we're victims in a matrix and that the Illuminati rule everything and there's nothing we can do until somebody else does it and we're kind of here and stuck.
Yeah,
what do you think about that? What is the role of our own individual minds and consciousness in co-creating this existence that we currently experience?
Yeah, I may have sent you a little bit of information about a book called Zero Limits, but let me discuss that a little bit. A guy named Joe Vitale, in Italy, I suppose it'd be Vitale, he wrote a book called Zero Limits, and he described the work of Dr. Hugh Lin. Dr. Lin, a PhD psychologist, Japanese-American, was hired by the state of Hawaii to work with criminally insane prisoners. And according to the story, he would sit at his desk and he'd look at a chart of a rapist or a killer, and he would send a message to the universe and to the high self of the inmate, the prisoner. The message was 4 statements. I love you. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. What he was doing was saying he was sorry for his perception. He was sorry that he perceived the guy as a killer or as a rapist. Now, in our current society, we take the point of view that we're responsible for our actions. You know, if I were to step on Janet's toe and break it, well, people would say, come on, Leo, pay the medical bill because you broke Janet's toe. Well, Dr. Yu Lin says that he's responsible for his perceptions. If he perceives a guy as a knothead or a goofball, that's his perception. And so if he wants to correct it, he says within himself, I'm sorry, I see you as a goofball. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. Over and over and over. Well, what's intriguing about the story, besides the fact that he borrowed this from a Hawaiian woman who called the system Ho'oponopono, the system is meant to help families deal with conflicts. And so he developed it to deal with perceptions. And so he would practice it and he would feel better. He wasn't quite so angry at somebody who cut him off in traffic or whatever happened. The thing about the story that's so intriguing is that according to observers, people around the prison system felt the changes. Staff would come to work. They were no longer attacked or threatened. The manacles came off. Medications came down. After 4 or 5 years, the ward was closed. There were still a few common criminals, but they were no longer insane. They were just sent off to other prisons. So if we accept the story, it means not only can we help ourselves feel better by this practice, we can help others. So that our spiritual commitment is not only to be kind and loving in our social behavior, but to be compassionate in our spiritual behavior, in our spiritual communication. Yee-haw! I love it.
Great. Go ahead.
Well, it's just very much like Rosensberg's compassionate communication, where no one causes your feelings or your reactions except yourself, and so that takes away all the blame and doesn't people on the defensive.
Very
right.
good.
And also Nassim Harriman was showing that you can mathematically plot it, that we're all connected by the singularities within us. So, we can change our own behaviors. It goes into the morphogenetic field through the singularity that's within the individual, affects the whole grid, the whole, what do you call that, the morphogenetic field, and then comes back down into the individual and into the grid, and it affects everybody there, and then that's how we can keep up-leveling ourselves personally and as a society to have the global changes that we want for all of humanity and all of creation. Which brings us to, we have about 5 minutes left to the show, that we are to prepare to become cosmic citizens. But right now, we're not even planetary persons. We're still national. So how do you see we go from this separation to universal consciousness and bring about, I think definitely bring about disclosure, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's, it seems to me it can be done at various levels, and it's being done at various levels. I like the model that there's a physical level of reality, there's a biological level, there's a psychosocial level, and that there's a spiritual level. So the planet can be seen as a physical object or organism, depending on one's view, but also a person could see the planet as a biological organism, a living organism, and it could be seen as a psychosocial communication, and if one accepts this premise, one could see the planet Earth as a spiritual entity, so that one could operate at the level of the little boy I was talking about, the 8th grader who knew when he grew up he was going to do terraforming to help planet Earth get back on even keel. Other people could help the biological critters, the polar bears that are losing their land in the poles. One could see the communication level as his or her work. One could see the spiritual Ho'oponopono level as his or her work. Or a person could be concerned at all levels, the physical or biological, the psychosocial, and the spiritual. And if that is the point of view that a person takes, then there's a lot of work to be done, but also it can be done in a spirit of play. And so my view is that I appreciate not only the questions you've offered, but also the comments that you have offered about your work. And I bless you and wish you well.
Oh, thank you. We're delighted to have this conversation with you, Leo.
We have two more minutes before the show is done. I wanted to just talk about our perceptions. We perceive these as our disowned selves, our demonic forces, but how do we see even the most perverse and heinous parts of existence as part of ourselves to own and integrate that?
Yeah, that's a good question because people have been dealing with that for years. I do think there are such things as demonic forces, dark forces. The interesting thing about them, though, is that they don't like to be exposed to the light. They don't like love and light. So if we live in love and light, then the demons are outside. It's like outside the circle. Whereas if we are afraid of the demons, then they got a hold of us. So once again, having a fearful, angry God, or having a fearful, angry parent, or having a fearful, angry sib, is not the most fun. The most fun is to have a loving sibling, or a loving parent, or a loving God or goddess. And if we take that to heart, then we can say, okay, demons exist, but I'll deal with them later on. Right now, I'm having too much fun playing in the love and light. Yeehaw.
One of the things I learned from Bill Baldwin is to say to ask a person to let their demon speak and say, "Demon, look inside. See that you too are of the light." And once they do that, they're not a demon anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Bill Baldwin had a lot of good comments. Yes, he did.
Okay. Thank you. Incredible